Welcome to Tech for Humans. This is the fourth in a series of 5 studies on technology and the place in its life for Christians. So I'm glad you are back, or maybe just joining us. We are going to get into another area of study, and it might be one that some of you were thinking from the beginning that we should be talking about. And in fact, over the next couple, I think we might hit some of those things. So let me show you where we're going just for the next little bit. Today, we're going to talk about routines and habits, how technology becomes a part of our daily lives, which I think a lot of people kind of think of when they think of technology, not just the kind of philosophical underpinnings that we've been looking at and the biblical underpinnings as well. And the next week, we're going to get into what I call living and dying. And one of the things that will be a part of that study is really what it means to be a human. And then a lot of people have asked about AI, artificial intelligence, which is an interesting field in technology, which has really been talked about a lot in the last 6 months in our culture. And so that will be part of that living and dying. So we're getting to a couple things that I know some of you have been anxious to study. And we're getting to them at the very end of our study just by coincidence. So we're going to be looking at those things as we go. Today, as we talk about routines and habits, where technology fits into our daily lives, we're going to start probably not where you thought. We're going to start by talking about some people called the Luddites. And you might have heard this term before, the Luddites. We typically mean, when we say in English, if we call someone a Luddite, we're saying that there's someone who is against technology, that they have either a moral or technical reason why they do not like technology, and they think we should get rid of it and we should go back to, I don't know, whatever was the previous era, maybe all the way back before the Stone Age or whatever. That's usually what we mean by the Luddites. The history of the group of people called the Luddites, though, is a bit more complicated than that. It goes back to England at the time of the Industrial Revolution, when a lot of, prior to the mechanization of this, people made clothes, textiles, things like that, often in their own home or in kind of shared areas where they had the freedom to make things on their own time, to pass the skills on, often from father to son, mother to daughter. But when it started coming in these machines that could make clothes differently, there was kind of, for the Luddites, there was a fork in the road. The Luddites were not against the technology itself, the idea that you could make the process of making clothes and textiles easier or more accurate or better quality. They were not against that. And they pictured a future in which that technology came into their own homes, where they were already making clothes, and it allowed the workers, the people who were using their skills to make clothes, to do it better, to enhance their skill in making clothes. But what the owners of factories pushed for was for that technology to work strictly for the owners, so that they could replace these skilled workers, oftentimes with children and other unskilled workers that they could take advantage of and give a lot less money, or just make work for free. So the Luddites were not against the technology itself per se. They were interested, they were passionate about who the technology served, how it was to be deployed, who it benefited and who it didn't benefited. When the world kind of went the direction of the factory owners who replaced skilled workers, then the Luddites went into action and they started smashing technology. And this is where they became infamous. And this is why now people will usually very negatively call someone a Luddite. Now, I'm not sure who should have won this battle, but what I'm interested in is the question that the Luddites were asking about technology. And I was recently reading about this by a writer named Cory Doctorow. He said the difference between de-skilling, so that's what the factory owners wanted, and democratizing, that's what the Luddites wanted, it isn't what the gadget does, it's who it does it for and who it does it to. I think this is a really interesting way of looking at technology, and important for people of faith to not just ask what any particular piece of technology, what any tool does, what its mechanical parts are, but how it changes our relationships with one another, who it does these things for and who it does it to. So a quick way of asking would be, who does technology work for? We could ask this question about a lot of different types of technologies and come up with different answers. A lot of times we don't ask this question. We tend to think of technology as just an inevitable drive towards greater and greater progress, which in some cases is true. But technology is not inevitable. And certainly how it works, who owns it, who uses it, who it helps, who it leaves behind, are important questions. They affect our lives every day. So if we go back to the tools that we've been talking about, and we've often used the example of a shovel, we could ask the question, who does the technology of a shovel work for? It's pretty cut and dry without importing a lot of different things. The shovel works for the person who's using it. It's really designed for one person to use, and it doesn't go beyond that. Although I guess it could be used in some kind of manufacturing line or automation system, it was really designed for one person to be able to dig faster. That's who a shovel works for. So that's pretty clear. But what about a smartphone? This is a much more difficult question. First of all, there are many different technologies packed into a smartphone, and it allows connection with all kinds of technologies out in the world. Many of the people who have a claim on our smartphones, many of the corporations, many of the different groups, all have competing interests in what they want and how they want it to work for. And believe me, it does work for people. Your smartphone does not just work for you. Many of the apps we use, especially in social media and news, the way that the advertising works in many apps, they're set up in a very specific way to do a specific thing to us. There's even there's a phrase called dark patterns, which refers to software technology on our phones or on the websites that we use that kind of trick us into doing something that we maybe wouldn't necessarily want, but really benefits other people. A really basic example of this is on many, many websites. It is extremely easy to sign up for, say, a free trial, put your credit card information in. They very gladly will take that information. But when you try to cancel your service, it can be very hard. In fact, there's many websites where you cannot cancel your service from the website. They force you to call a number, and then you have to wait in line and all of this. They make it really easy to sign up, really hard to cancel it. That's just one example, but there's all kinds of subtle ways where the people who design the technology that we use are affecting us or working on it or getting something out of us. It is not a coincidence, if you've had the experience of watching things in our media, that you might feel outraged quite often. That's not just because the world is more outrageous. It's because many people in media have learned that outrage gets people hooked, sells more advertisements. So Cable news, for instance, if you watch it, is much more outrageous than it used to be, because outrage gets people excited, it gets them connected, it gets them coming back again and again, because it works on us and it's working for the people who own those medias. Another example that I've recently learned about is on social media. If you've ever seen the phenomenon of kind of the personality quizzes that might be, Facebook is where I've seen them a lot, and it asks you a bunch of questions and then it tells you, which character from Harry Potter you are or something. A lot of people have done those. They're fun. They seem very innocent, but we now know in many cases that the answers that people were putting in were aggregated on this big data thing and helped train different companies and advertisers what things you liked, because you told it the things that you liked. And then they sell that to advertisers to send you more specific things. Now, you may find that creepy or you may be totally okay with that. But the point is that the things that we use on computers are often not just for us. They are doing work for other people, which makes this much more complicated when it comes to asking who does technology work for on computers, on our smartphones. It would pay for us to spend a little bit of time with all of these different things and asking how are they working for us, maybe learning who they are working for and who they are not working for. It is not just inevitable that we use all of them or that we accept all of it. We get to choose. That is part of our vocation that Adam and Eve were given in the garden with the tools that they use to work on the creation around them. We have a role, we have a responsibility to use it. So ask, who does technology work for? We'll come back to that in a bit. I want to switch to another idea, since we're talking about routines and habits, and to think about time and how we live in time, how time is structured, and how that's affected by technology. So let's look at the Bible. Let's look in the very beginning. We've done a lot from the creation story, so let's continue that. After the days of creation, if you remember, in the first 6 days, God was creating the world. So this is what happened after that. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the 7th day, God finished the work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. So there's something that happens. There's something different about the 7th day. Something about rest. That even God would build rest into kind of the fabric of the world, into the weekly fabric of the world, the way that time is kept throughout the world. The people of Israel learned this lesson more specifically when they were enslaved in Egypt. They learned what it meant to not have rest, when because of technological choices that Pharaoh had made for what they needed and what they wanted, the people of Israel ended up working every day. Pharaoh was asking for more from less until they were harried, till they were tired, exhausted, and could not worship fully because they had nothing left. So after they leave Egypt and they pass through the Red Sea, they get these commandments. And one of the commandments is about the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. So let's think for a minute about what technology means in relation to Sabbath, in relation to rest, and this idea that we, as God's people, should rest as God rested once a week, that we should keep a particular time holy. Now, as Christians, we don't keep the seventh day as Jews do, which would be Saturday, but we have moved our worship and our placing God's word at the front of our lives onto this day, Sunday, the first day, the day of the resurrection, really the eighth day, as some way of saying it, as both the end of the creation, but also the beginning of the new creation. So where does technology come in there? How do we figure out what the daily rhythms of our life should be? We can look at some statistics from a few years ago from Andy Crouch's book, The Tech-Wise Family, and I found them to be interesting. People said, I set aside, and they were talking about the time that they were setting aside. So 14% of people said they set aside 1 day a week for rest. 21% said they set time each day to spend with God. Okay, well, that's a little bit better, I guess. 16% time each day to spend alone. Only 12% to spend time each day for an activity that recharges me. And only 12% said they set aside a time of day when I don't use electronics. Now, the way that the bar charts kind of look on this graph, it kind of seems like a lot, but if you think about it, those numbers are all pretty small. Only 12% of people who set aside a time of day when they don't use electronics, just 12%. Maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 11 people, 1 in 9 people spend time intentionally not using electronics. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone uses them all day, but it means that only 12% set aside a specific time where they don't use electronics. It kind of shows you how much electronics have come into our lives, and the fact that we are not always very intentional about when we do or do not use them. Here's the next statistic. What do you do on your day of rest? Among those who did set aside 1 day a week for rest, 44% did some kind of enjoyable work. Okay, so maybe that was working in the garden, something that did do something for them. It filled them up instead of draining them. Only 19% said they did no work at all, kind of took it literally. 37% of those who did set aside 1 day a week for rest did non-enjoyable work, things that just had to be done if it needed to be done. So even folks who did set aside a whole day, a third of them ended up working anyways. One more. This question simply asks, do you take regular breaks from social media? So from that specific technology that we use at Facebook, Twitter, those kind of things. 60% of people said they never take a regular break from it. No Sabbath from social media. 21% said for a while, 17% permanently. So smaller numbers of people took some breaks, but the majority of people did not report ever taking a regular break from social media. I just found that interesting, the way that something that really didn't exist that long ago has become that ingrained into our lives. My guess would be that many of us don't think about it that intentionally to ask whether we should take regular breaks from it. It may be that some people have thought about it very carefully, prayed about it, considered the Sabbath and all that we are made to be, and decided that they should use social media nonstop every day. But I'm guessing the majority of people have fallen into using it every day as a habit without being that intentional about it. especially because social media uses many of those dark patterns I talked about earlier that get us hooked, that know how to keep us addicted to using it, even if we're not intentionally deciding every day, I want to wake up and use social media for most of the day. I don't think many people think that, but many people end up doing that. So it would help us, I think, to think a bit about how we structure time, going back to the ideas of Sabbath, going back to the ideas of carving out space for being ourselves, for worshiping God, for being neighbors, where we're not doing work. In many ways, being on social media, using our electronics, ends up being like a kind of work, even though most of us would not call it that. There's a related idea to the way that we do habits and routines in the church. And the ancient teaching of the church has something to say about this, and it's called liturgy. Liturgy, you could say, is just kind of structured official routines and habits that the people of the church do together. So think about some of the things that we do in Sunday morning worship that we structure, that we intentionally do every time we come together. We hear the confession and forgiveness. We share a meal together. We do the peace. We pass the peace every week. Now, we don't do these things because it is mission critical that every single week, if you don't pass the peace, you will die or you will become a bad person or what. That's not why we do it. But the habit, the routine of passing the peace every week, it does something to us. Or at least that's the point of liturgy, that it should do something, that the things that we repeat, that we make time for, that we carve space out for as a routine, does form us, especially over time. Imagine someone who has lived their life in the church, how many times they have gathered with others for a meal and hearing the words of forgiveness. Maybe they don't point out or couldn't point out but one or two times where that had a special significance, but yet doing it over and over helped form them as people. Now think about our use of technology, particularly electronics, and how does the way that we use it over and over again affect us? There's kind of a liturgy of technology, a liturgy of electronics that is also working to form us. That's not necessarily bad, but we should be aware of those habits, of those routines, and what they are doing, especially considering that technology does not always work just for us, but serves other people's interests, especially in this age of computers. How do these things affect us time and time again? So let's think of some questions to ask. I've got two questions that I hope that you will wrestle with. The first is to think of a specific technology that you have in your home and ask, how has it served you specifically? Not just why you have it, I bought it because everyone has one or because I heard that it was great. How does it really serve you specifically? Some of these are pretty easy answers to say. We have central air conditioning in my house, and I can tell you that specifically serves our family by making it much more pleasant to live inside our home. It keeps the humidity down. It keeps the temperature down far more than we could do with windows and fans. So that is specifically serving our family. It gets more complicated with electronics, though. Television. How has it specifically served you? It might be harder to say if you think deeply about it. I think we could, and we have a television, but think about how it serves you specifically. So choose a specific technology and do that. This will help us to strengthen this muscle of asking, what is the technology we use? Why do we use it? Who does it serve? And how is it working for us? Good questions to ask about anything if we take seriously our vocation in God's world about working on world, doing work together. Okay, here's the second question to ask. What does our liturgy of technology, if you want to call it that, or how does it form us as people? What does it do to us as people of God? And then how is that different from church liturgy? Again, I'm not assuming that it will be a completely negative answer about what the liturgy of technology does, our habits when it comes to using phones and televisions and computers. But how does it form us? What does it do to us? And then how is that different from the ways that we are formed by our church liturgy, by reading the scriptures, by coming together and gathering in person, by sharing the peace, by sharing a meal, by hearing about our baptism again and again? And how are these things serving one another? Because technology can serve those same things that we're getting out of church liturgy. But where do they come at odds? Interesting things to think about. I would love to hear some of your answers to these questions. Please respond in any way that you can after you see this video. And let's think together about these deep ways that technology affects us and how we can use it as people of God. So I'll see you all in the next one, our last of this series, next week when we talk about living and dying with technology, and God's peace in the meantime.